So the stages of sleep, you can look to the bottom. This is a graph that you'll sort of see pretty often when we're talking about sleep. It's just a way to show the progression of an individual on any given night, how they progress through the different stages of sleep. So if you look at the y-axis, we have awake, stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then when you go from left to right on that x-axis, you can see as this line gets deeper, this individual is moving through the different stages of sleep, and they periodically come back to that REM sleep, which we're going to talk about. And you can also see, notice now, which again we'll talk about in a little bit, is that as the night goes on, the individual spends more time in REM than they do in NREM sleep, which is a common theme. It's common for most adults. Okay, so waking consciousness. In this state, an individual's level of alertness may vary. So we're talking about waking consciousness, which means throughout the day when we are awake, just your normal average human being when they are awake. So when there are different types of waves that your brain gives off. A couple that are given off in the waking state and a couple that are given off in the sleep state. And we can basically tell sort of the level of arousal and the level sort of like how aroused or alert you are in terms of conscious level. So for example, your brain gives off alpha waves when you are in this sort of relaxed and sleepy state. So if you're laying in your bed, you're getting ready for bed and you sort of feel that calm come over you, you're sort of winding down from the day, you're not really processing a lot of information at the time, you're not really using any cognitive ability, so your brain is sort of drifting off to the autopilot, but you're still fully conscious, you're still fully aware of your surroundings and your environment. If you had an EEG on, then it would show alpha waves. So these alpha waves are sort of small waves, but again, they indicate a relaxed sleepy state that your brain gives off. So the other waking type of wave is called a beta wave. So these are higher frequency and lower amplitude than alpha waves, so they're smaller than alpha waves is the term that we would use. So those indicate a focused and alert state of consciousness. So if you look at alpha and beta waves, when you're looking at these waves, the general trend is that the smaller the waves are, so the more waves there are in a specific period, which we call the frequency, and the smaller the amplitude of the waves, that generally indicates a more aroused alert state. So I didn't write anything about gamma waves, but they are up here on the diagram, for example. So gamma waves, you can see the frequency is a lot higher than beta waves, and the amplitude is similar, it might be even a little bit smaller. But when you compare these really tiny waves to theta and delta waves, which we're going to talk about in a minute, you can see a marked difference between the two of them. So these smaller waves with these higher frequencies, they indicate that the individual is awake, is aware, and that they are, the smaller the waves get, like when we're getting toward these gamma waves, it's sort of problem solving, concentration, those sort of, those high cognitive processes. So that's, those small waves are indicative of that. So when an EEG shows a person transitioning from beta waves to alpha waves, it's an indication that they are preparing to enter sleep. So there have been, numerous sleep studies. They do sleep studies all the time. PSGs, they're called polysomnographies. That's the way that we can, measure EEGs, breathing, heart rate, a couple of things. So a sleep tech, for example, when they're looking at the EEG and they see the shift from beta waves, these smaller waves to alpha waves, it's an indication that the individual is about to fall asleep. Once the individual does fall asleep, we enter stage 1. So during stage 1, the brain switches over to what are called theta waves. So these are low to moderate amplitude and intermediate frequency. So we can look over here. So this is drowsiness, more so drowsiness switching into the first stage. When your brain is giving off theta waves, you're in a very, very light sleep. Your awareness of your environment is definitely reduced if your brain is giving off theta waves, because technically you are entering that first stage of stage 1 sleep. So the sleeping person is less responsive to stimuli than during waking consciousness. These earlier stages, as you get deeper into the stages of sleep, you become less and less responsive to stimuli of the external environment. So stage 1, you can think of it like a sort of light sleep. You're just starting to get into the motion. You're not as responsive to stimuli in the environment if you were awake, but you still are somewhat responsive compared to other stages of sleep. So in this stage, there are slow rolling eye movements, and there's also moderate striated muscle activity. So your muscles are still moving. They're not completely paralyzed right now. So as your brain activates, as those different areas of your brain are activated, your muscles will activate as well, to the corresponding brain areas. So after stage 1, normally, you'll drift off into stage 2. So as the body leaves that stage and enters stage 2, the type of wave emitted on the EEG is still theta waves. So we're not really switching to a different type of wave. However, the pattern does change a little bit. So 2 wave patterns is what we refer to them as. They begin to emerge in stage 2. So stage 1 is mostly we're switching over from alpha to theta waves, and it's a pretty consistent stream of theta waves that will come out of the EEG. And then if you're watching it for a little bit, at a certain point, you're going to start seeing these irregularities in the EEG. So there are 2 sort of irregularities known as K complexes and sleep spindles. They both last about a half second to 1.5 seconds. And when you start seeing these sort of these sort of patterns interspersed in that theta wave distribution, that's indicative that the individual is entering stage 2 sleep. So the 2 K complexes is the first one, and these occur as a single wave burst that is lower in frequency and higher in intensity than the surrounding theta waves. So these last about 0.5 seconds. So it's a single wave burst. It's basically just one long wave among all of the theta waves. That's known as a K complex. And these are really just random bursts of energy from the brain. They're not really super well understood, but it is one of the ways that we classify and differentiate stage 2 from stage 1. The other pattern that is evident in stage 2, those are called sleep spindles. So those are short bursts of multiple waves with high frequency and moderate intensity. These typically last 0.5 to 1.5 seconds. So in basically the same time period as K complexes, there are sleep spindles as well. And the sleep spindles are short multiple waves. So if we see a K complex, it's usually going to be a longer singular wave that's out of the ordinary in terms of that theta pattern that we've been seeing. Sleep spindles are the exact opposite. They're a bunch of short waves sort of stuck in the middle of those theta patterns. So you definitely see both of those during stage 2. And also during stage 2, there's no more eye movements. So those slow rolling eye movements from stage 1 are diminished. There's no eye movement during stage 2, but there's still muscle activity. So the brain is still, slightly active, and muscles are moving. And it's not, you're not punching and kicking usually in your sleep. It's more so, muscle twitches, slight activations here and there. And this stage brings the body to a state of relaxation associated with sleep. So once we start to get to stage 2 sleep, the body is really entering that deep relaxation. So you're even less responsive to external stimuli. There's a decrease in heart rate, a decrease in respiration, and a decrease in body temperature as well. Okay, so stage 3 and stage 4, I put both of these on the same slide because they're not too different from each other. And I think until pretty recently, probably like 10, 15 years ago, NREM was actually only divided into 3 stages, but recently stage 4 of NREM sleep has also been defined, and we'll go over that right now. So stage 3, the brain intersperses theta waves with delta waves. So the new wave that we're learning about on this slide are known as delta waves, and these are high amplitude and low frequency. So we call these slow waves. They're indicative of deep sleep. So stage 3 and stage 4 is also sometimes referred to as slow wave sleep, and that's because of the delta waves that are given off. So if you look at this delta wave, you can see these crests and peaks are so long. It's just a completely different kind of brainwave than, say, if you look at beta. So you look at these 2 EEGs, you know for a fact that these are 2 completely different waves. So these really, really long, large waves are called delta waves, and those are indicative of very deep sleep. So when you see these waves, there's not a lot the person can do to react to external stimuli. They're almost completely unreactive unless there is a huge, disruption in this person's sleep. So they're continuing to display no eye movement, and still they have moderate muscle movement. They're unresponsive to external stimuli. And so as the brain switches completely to producing delta waves, so remember in stage 3, it's delta waves and, interspersed with these theta waves. As the night continues on and we're getting closer to stage 4, delta waves become predominant, and eventually the brain stops producing theta waves and completely starts producing delta waves. So when that happens, the person is considered to have entered stage 4 sleep. Heart rate and digestion slow further, and at this point, growth hormone is secreted as well, which obviously lets us understand, and it points the direction to the fact that sleep is important in growth and development. And then we have REM sleep. REM, which is short for rapid eye movement, is most easily identified by the bursts of quick eye movement present. So if you see an individual sleeping, you probably very quickly, even without a trained eye or without any sort of knowledge of the topic, you would very quickly be able to see that they're in REM sleep because you could actually see their eyes moving through their eyelids. So the waves emitted during REM sleep closely resemble waking beta waves, which is very interesting because when we enter sleep, we're still sleeping. We are still unconscious and unresponsive to external stimuli. So we're going from that deep wave sleep, we're going from that long wave sleep, stage 3, stage 4, to REM sleep. So those super long waves, those turn into these REM waves that very, very similarly, they sort of mimic beta waves, these waking waves. So it's really interesting how brain activity during REM sleep, is almost identical to brain activity during daytime. So during the stage, there's virtually no muscle movement, which is different, remember, from the NREM stages, where we do have some muscle movement, although the brain activity resembles a conscious alert state. So for this reason, REM sleep is also referred to as paradoxical sleep, because it's a paradox. We're still sleeping. There is more brain activity in REM sleep than there is in any other stage of sleep, yet there is virtually no muscle movement. So we increase brain activity, but we decrease muscle movement completely. So that's why it's called paradoxical sleep. But scientists are now pretty much thinking that REM sleep is super important for cognitive and memory consolidation, and just for repairing of certain structures in the brain. And dreaming typically occurs during REM sleep just because there's so much brain activity. So it does occur during REM sleep, but there is growing evidence that most people can dream in NREM stages, like stage 3 and 4. So the chronology of sleep throughout the night, your body will cycle through REM and non-REM stages 1 through 4. Each cycle lasts about 90 minutes. And when I say a cycle, it basically means going from NREM to REM and then out of NREM. Cycles don't necessarily have to go through all of the stages of NREM. It's basically just NREM to REM to NREM. So it's possible to jump stages of sleep instead of moving through them sequentially. A person can leave stage 2 to enter REM, for example. And we sort of saw this graphic before, but if you look towards the beginning of the night, this individual will enter stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Then they're climbing back up stage 3, stage 2, and then they jump from stage 2 all the way to REM. And then they sort of follow a similar trajectory on the second cycle. They go up to stage 2, go back down, go up to REM. But when you come over to the right later in the night, you can see that some of these stages are skipped. Over towards the end, we again go from stage 2 to REM. And the second half of the night, we're not even reaching stage 4. So it's not completely necessary, and a lot of times it doesn't happen, that you have to experience all of these NREM stages sequentially before you can get to REM. So it's possible to jump stages of sleep. We said that infants spend about 16 hours a day sleeping, and much of this is spent in REM. So generally as an organism ages, they need less sleep per night, and they also spend less amount of time in REM. So this is basically more evidence of the importance of REM in growth and development, because infants and organisms that are developing spend a larger fraction of their sleeping time in REM. Teens need about 9 to 10 hours a night of uninterrupted sleep. And by the time a person is in their 60s, they may only need 6 hours of sleep a night, for example. Average humans get about 6 to 8 hours of sleep. And the older you get, the smaller the fraction of time you spend in REM sleep a night it decreases.